and another thing, your favorite news and politics podcast, back for another... Was this a good week? Was this a good week? I don't know. Well, the pod will be good, but...
The pod will be good.
Another...
Could argue it was a terrible week.
Could argue it was a terrible week. Another jam-packed episode, nonetheless, listen to me. I slammed my head off the wall this morning, so let's lead off by why I might seem a little slow today. So, I woke up this morning, and we woke up late, first off. Bert kept us up until about, now look who's being all ashamed of himself, and real quick here. I should do some tidy housekeeping real quick. Host Vince Patrone, producer Bertram Beans, who kept us up all night with his rantings and ramblings. Giovanna here to keep me on course. So, this morning, we woke up at 11 o'clock because Bert had us up pretty early, knocking a plant off a shelf and spilling water everywhere. Worth noting that Bert is not just the producer of this podcast, but also a feisty little four-legged feline with a tuxedo coat and the tiniest bean paws. So this morning, we got up late, and I had an Amazon package pretty right away. So we dove right into our Amazon packages. What came in the mail for us? First, I got this cool Ed Markey t-shirt that says, "Tell your father." And then I also got bicycle lights in my bicycle toolkit. I recently started riding a bicycle for the first time. Then in 4 years, I did actual physical activity this week.
How many miles you rode?
I rode 55 miles this week for the first time, because it's 11 miles both ways.
55. I'm stupid. I thought it was 55,000 miles.
Well, how?
I've been thinking, wow, you had 50,000 miles.
Wow, he went 50,000 miles. No. Just 55 miles. But that's still coming off about 4 years of not doing anything, strenuous. Because, we go for our walks, but that's not...
We weren't walking 10 miles a day, though, or 11 miles a day.
Some days we would. We would get a good walk in some days. Yeah, but not during the week. But
we haven't done that in a while.
Yeah. So the last time, and I should backtrack here, the last time I did anything with any athletic ability, any fitness-involved kind of activity, I guess you couldn't even call it that, was I played softball one time about probably 4 or 5 years ago now with my friend Manny. Shout out to Manny. We were up in the Bronx, and I had a great time. I did things I hadn't done since high school, and by that I mean ground balls, showed off my range in the outfield, quick on the base paths. Did I swing the bat better than ever before? Absolutely. Was I about 150 pounds heavier than I was when I played high school ball? Absolutely. So you could say that there were some things playing to my benefit, and I took advantage of them on that day 5 years ago. The next day, however, I felt like I was literally going to die of exhaustion. I played myself so ragged. I was, I think, 3 hours late for my shift at Orin's. That's back whenever I was at Orin's Daily Roast. Shout out. Yeah, shout out. They have good coffee still. Not the best.
Decide whether or not he wanted to shout out.
I had a good time. First job in the city. I enjoyed it enough. But anyway, don't want to linger too much on that past. But anyway, so I missed my shift the next day and I was exhausted. So I took the next 4 to 5 years off of any kind of athletic or fitness activity just to avoid that kind of pain and suffering again. That mostly was what it was, a good portion of it. I never wanted to feel like that again. So I started riding a bike this week, so I needed to get lights and I needed to get a tool bag. And they came in the mail this morning. So I put the lights on my bicycle so I can go for rides early in the morning and at night, which is often when I do my commuting to work, which is where I get most of my biking in. So I put the rear bike on the rear light on the back of my bike. And in our bathroom, which is already pretty narrow, and since this is a studio apartment, it's also where my bike lives, I went to turn my head too quickly, and I knocked my gourd right off of that little hangy bar where you're supposed to hang your towels to dry. Right off the what is that material? The mask drying rack, as it has turned into. Absolutely, that's where we dry all of our COVID masks. Towel rack / mask drying rack. But what's that made out of? What's that material that juts out of the wall? Is that porcelain? What is that?
Acrylic.
Acrylic? That's not acrylic. It didn't feel like acrylic. Whatever. Not the bar itself. but the actual, the wall part, the ceramic part, rammed my head right off that ceramic part. So if I seem a little off today, it's because I might have concussed myself adding a part to my bicycle for my own safety. So I don't know. I don't know how you can manage that. Listener beware. So again, we have a half-decent podcast for you today. We'll try to keep it light, but it's pretty heavy, so we will dive on in. It was an interesting week. We had 2 major events going on at the same time around the 5 other major events that are already going on. So we had, obviously, the RNC that was this week, or as it will be known, Cop Lie Fest 2020. They had 2 nights devoted to cops and 2 nights devoted to lying. It was quite a spectacle. We'll talk about it a little bit later on, because we didn't watch too much of it for our own mental well-being and our own... Just because we knew there wasn't going to be anything there for us, we didn't watch it. We didn't want to tune in to have people call us the enemy. We didn't want to log in to be or tune in so that we could sit there and feel like someone was blaming us for all of the problems that are happening in this administration. So we didn't tune in. I don't just mean us personally. I mean just radical leftists. So we didn't tune in. As radical leftists, we chose to skip the RNC for the most part. We caught the Crooked Media stream a couple of days, but even then, it was just pretty boring and hard to keep up with. So there was that this week, and it was all happening in the shadow of what happened in, I hope I say the town right, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Did I say it right?
What'd you say?
Kenosha, Wisconsin? Sorry. Okay. So what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin this week, which was obviously the police shooting of Jacob Blake, who, and I hope I get the full story here, but it sounds like he was just stopping to break up a fight in a neighborhood he was driving through, or his neighborhood.
I'm not sure if it was his, but he stopped to break up a fight.
He stopped to break up a fight between these two ladies with his family in the car. The cops arrive on the scene, so he goes to leave. The cops then follow Jacob Blake to his car, shoot him in the back with a taser, and then when they realize that that's not enough, they go ahead and they shoot him 7 times in the back, leaving him paralyzed for life, and doing it again all in front of his children, all because he broke up a fight. So that obviously has been what has set the tone for the week, and rightfully so, and justly so, as it's just another incident of police choosing not to learn a lesson from what has been called a mistake in the past, but that mistake, every time this happens, now starts to look just a little bit more intentional every time it happens. Maybe at first it was, oh, they went too far. But now it's to the point where they have to be consciously realizing what they're about to do. There's no way that a police officer who's been in the police force for the past even just 6 months could live through being a cop during the George Floyd protests and the very minimal amounts of change that happened after the George Floyd protest and the George Floyd murder. How could a cop have lived through that and then not even, what are we, less than 3 months removed? Has it been less than 3 months? Or just about 3 months?
We're coming up on 3
Coming up on just under 3 months later. Go ahead and slaughter another black person in the street for literally no reason at all, other than that they were just trying to go home. Or wherever Jacob Blake and his family were off to. And I know that there was incidents after George Floyd. I know that George Floyd happened around Breonna Taylor. Well, Breonna Taylor was murdered before George Floyd was murdered.
That was in March, and then George Floyd was at the end of May. Ahmaud Arbery, I think, was
middle of May. I'm ashamed of myself. I didn't look it up, and I can't remember the name of the man who was murdered in Atlanta by the cops at that Wendy's. Can you look that up for me real quick? And then I can't remember anybody's names right now. Maybe it's because I knocked myself on the in my head on the wall. But who is the kid that got killed in Wisconsin not too long ago, or Minnesota? Rayshard Brooks
was the one who was shot
in Atlanta.
What was the other question you had?
The one who played violins for cats.
Oh,
Elijah McClain. Thank you.
In 2019.
Oh.
Just got brought back.
Okay. But
because the case was dismissed immediately.
So even so, no matter when the murder happened, all of this has come to light within the past 6 months, and all of it has been catalysts for change and protest and national outrage and all kinds of other discourse. And most importantly, just protest and calls for change. That is the most important thing to take here, is that these events, despite being as awful as they are, these murders happening and these lives being taken unjustly by police officers who are just shitbags, obviously, just don't understand decency or empathy, have all led to at least these calls for action, these protests. What was that? I was in the middle of a thought. 1,019 people have been shot and killed by police in the past year. Is that from the Times? That looks like the Times. Is that the Times or the Post?
It's the Post.
Wow.
They have a running count.
These media outlets got to change their ways of looking. Anyway, and it shows that, and to quote our good friend Dom Smith here, nobody cares. None of the people who this needs to get to, none of the people who this message needs to get through most to, care. They've gone out of their way to not learn the lessons they needed to learn, and they've shut themselves off to the information that they need to have to understand what is really happening with the systemic oppression of black people in this country, and the use of policing to enforce that oppression, and the use of policing to further that oppression, and the use of policing to make it harder every day for black people to live their lives. You can sit there and talk about the good cops do. You can sit there and propaganda. You can sit there and what if from your couch. I got involved in a Facebook back and forth this week with a couple of people. I'm not going to name any names or state any relations. But one of them was playing the what about game. And they said, what about this? I don't even know the kid's name. His last name was Cannon, because that's all Republicans and GOP people use. They just use last names on Twitter because they don't want to take the time to actually learn anybody's name. Well, what about when this happened? And there was a story like a month ago where someone murdered a 5-year-old boy in his front yard, and there was no media outrage about it. Well, why? And they're all screaming, well, why no outrage? And maybe it's because the situations are different. We're not just upset because people are being murdered. We're not just upset about that. People get murdered every day, and that doesn't make it any better. People of every race and every culture get murdered every day. But there's literally only one race and one culture of people whose murderers get away every day and go without consequence every day, and are often, in fact, times glorified every day. And that is the people who kill black folks. That is anybody who takes the life of a black person, be it a cop, be it someone going to a protest to shoot people in the case of that Kyle Rittenhouse, that piece of shit 17-year-old who is now some hero on the right. Fucking, what's-her-face? I hate her so much. I can't remember her name. I can't remember any names today. Ann Coulter says she wants him to be president. Fuck Ann Coulter. Sorry, mother, but fuck Ann Coulter. I know you're not my mom's not a diehard Ann Coulter fan, but my mom's been giving me flack lately because I say the F word too much on the program. It's going to be an F word heavy pod today. I haven't said fuck Tucker Carlson yet, but that's next. Because first you had, again, Ann Coulter saying that she wants Kyle Rittenhouse to be president, but then about 6 hours later, Tucker Carlson obviously had to one-up her because these two just have to one-up each other on being shitty. I want you to pay attention to this, too. Next time you're following the discourse on Twitter or online, and this gets us a little off topic here, watch how Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter feel that they need to out-white supremacist each other. It is staggering. One will say something, and one moments later will say something crazier, and they'll go back and forth for the next hour trying to be the glory child of the alt-right. And it's pretty startling to watch. So then Tucker Carlson came on and said that Kyle Rittenhouse was justified in his killing of 2 protesters and wounding of another. How crazy is that? We're to the point in society now where the Republican Party and their sympathizers feel that it is okay for a 17-year-old boy to leave his home with an assault rifle, cross state lines, be on camera saying things like he's here to protect the property. I'm here to protect the property. Oh, yeah, hi, here I am to protect the property. How do you think that makes you sound, first off? There's people out there that think that this sounds like a legitimate call to action, protecting property, protecting businesses, protecting people's homes, as if it's their job to do. It's not your job to do. Okay, just stay in your basement or wherever you're at, wherever you're living. I know that's something that they always go to is, oh, back out of your basement. But anyway, there is this lack of outrage anytime a murder happens to a black person in a specific group. And it's to the point where that specific group of people, the racists of our society, and it's startling to see how many there are, have had every opportunity to prove that they are not a racist person, to prove that they are not someone who only looks for the bad in certain groups of people to justify the acts of others. Because then that's always the next step in these situations. Well, the police had to have their reason to kill him. The police must have had a reason. And of course, they went and found their reason. They found that Jacob Blake had a prior arrest. They found that Jacob Blake had a knife in his car. They found that Jacob Blake may have had a gun in his car. Well, last time I checked, not illegal to have a gun. That's one of the things that all these Republicans and these conservatives and these members of the GOP who continue to protect police officers and talk about Leos on Facebook and all that shit. They love screaming about how we're coming to take their guns away, too. Love talking about how us radical leftists and us Democrats and the Black Lives Matter movement and the socialists and Joe Biden can't wait to come take their guns away. But then what's their reason for shooting a black man in cold blood in the middle of the day in the middle of a street? That he might have had a gun in his car. Oh, big, scary gun in his car. Oh, wow. But don't forget who was allowed to go hang out outside of a state capitol building for hours on end with assault rifles. Literally go inside of a capitol with assault rifles and threaten lawmakers without any intervention from the police. All over having to wear masks. All over having to stay inside. This was actually before masks. We're, of course, talking about whenever all the, I don't even know what to call them, anti-maskers, anti-coronavirus people, the denialists went to protest social distancing. And they had to take their guns with them for some reason, whenever they knew nothing would happen. And then they were allowed, these people, these same people who were protesting social distancing with assault rifles, were allowed, gun-toting on the steps of state capitals, were allowed to do that, were allowed to run up and yell in the face of cops, spit on cops, assault cops, push and shove police officers, had nothing happen. Had nothing happen to them. But then you look on the flip side of this, and you see how Black Lives Matter protesters are treated, how the protesters in Portland, Oregon have been treated by police officers and by law enforcement. And you see just how loud the silent part of all of this is. Police exist at this point to protect one sector of society, and that is the people that they know, and that is the people that remind them most of themselves. And it's tough to say this because I know that there are cops that don't want that to be true, but every cop that is a part of this system has a job to speak up and say that they are a part of the system and try to change that system. Until cops start doing that, that is why we say that all cops are bad, or all cops are, bastards, whatever the actual term is. It's because they've had every opportunity. Police departments, police unions, police sympathizers, people who talk about how, well, they have a such and such who's a cop, who have had every opportunity to open a book, open a blog post, open a fucking Medium article, and teach themselves something they didn't know yesterday about oppression in this country, about what the Black Lives Matter movement is about, what started it, this, that, and the other thing. All kinds of social justice issues are out there for them to learn about. And they have gone out of their way to do the exact opposite and entrench themselves deeper in their off-base views, and their deeply racist views, and their deeply nationalist views at times even. They've gone further out of their way to become more radical of their own beliefs. That's why There is no getting through to these people anymore. I've decided there is going to be a small sect of society that no matter what happens, they are going to find ways to, what about this? What about that? What if this is true? What if that is true? They will always try to find a way to justify this. And that is why every bit of outrage from the right side of this, by that I mean the Black Lives Matter side of this and the protesters side of this, is as justifiable as it is. And that's what makes the RNC and everything that happened at the RNC this week and the rhetoric that they were using and the rhetoric that has taken over the Republican Party is just so toxic and is just so much just a lie. At this point, the Republican Party, and at this point, conservatism and anti-Black Lives Matter and all these white nationalist groups, Boogaloo Boys, the fucking KKK, the rest of them, all live in the same Republican Party tent because the Republican Party has shown itself to only be about serving their needs and looking to be a part of their lives and knowing that that is people that they want to have on their side. And that's why you saw the RNC as it was this week. That's why you had multiple nights of cop, 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 cop. That's why you had multiple nights of look at what these leftists and these protesters are doing to your cities. That's why people think that I don't know, I can't even think of a city. I want to name the city that was cited to me, but there's people that think that Richmond, Virginia is suddenly up in fucking flames over these protests. Or people that believe that these towns that have Black Lives Matter protests happening, they think everything looks like that 1 4-block radius in Portland, where the protesters were able to take over that, the cops left that precinct to be. What was it? What'd they call that? The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, right? That's different. There was the Chaz, and then there was the
Yeah, it was called the Autonomous.
Oh, there was another one too.
Capitol Hill Autonomous.
Yeah.
Free Capitol Hill.
Okay, so there was the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone where it was just the Portlanders running Portland. And guess what? There was nothing bad about that. The thing about the Chaz that turned into this whole story about why you need federal authorities in your town and why the president needs to send unmarked vans full of people, of police authorities to come take you off the streets is because they're destroying these towns. But guess what? They're not. These protests are largely peaceful. He tweeted this morning that in Kenosha, Wisconsin, once they sent the National Guard in, the violence stopped. The only violence I heard of out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, were the police who, again, paralyzed Jacob Blake and then fucked up here, handcuffed him to his hospital bed, and Kyle Rittenhouse, who murdered 2 protesters and wounded another. That's the only violence I've heard of out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's the only violence around these protests that I've heard of. So if the president wants to take credit for stopping that, good. If he thinks he's the one who's stopping it, good. But we know he's not. We know that is not the case. We know he is just using this for more political clout in an election to turn out more of his base. More of this base that is not going to move on these issues. The people that are outraged on Twitter and on Facebook because the NBA is not playing. And now I'm never going to watch the NBA again, or I'm never going to watch the Mets again. Can you believe what they did last night with the Marlins? All of that. People talking like they're not going to do things anymore because of this, or they're lying. First off, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. They're not going to stop watching sports. And they're showing who they truly are because they do not care about athletes. They do not care about black people outside of the vessel of them, of what service they provide to them. Someone made a really good point, and this speaks to the classism issues in our society. We might have talked about it in the pod a couple weeks ago too. The Upper West Side mothers, they're running away. They see the Upper West Side as becoming riddled with homeless, becoming unlivable. The lifestyle they moved there for doesn't exist anymore. Which is really just to say that there isn't... and it's not just on the Upper West Side, it's all over New York. People are moving out of downtown in Soho. People are and be it that they can't afford their rents anymore. Not so much the case in Soho, I think, especially in the building I'm working out of. But people are leaving New York. And I understand the working people leaving New York. I understand the people that relied on cafe jobs, restaurant jobs. What other kind of service jobs have been impacted pretty heavily? I'm trying to think. I really only know hospital. I only know
People who work in airports.
Hotels, airports, people in stadiums. I understand people like that who are having a hard time finding work right now. Who know there isn't the job that they lost because of the coronavirus back here in New York. I understand them going home. I understand them leaving. I get that. I hope that those folks come back as long as that they aren't leaving because catering industry. As long as those people are leaving for that reason, because there is not a sustainable life right now for them. We're on the lucky side of things right now where I was able to go back to my job. My job was there for me. I wasn't going to leave regardless, but there is the other side of the people leaving New York City right now. And I know we've been kind of all over the place on this podcast, but the people leaving New York City because, well, New York is changed now. I can't go to restaurants anymore. I can't go to the bar with my girls. I can't go get a mimosa anymore. I can't even get a fucking mimosa in this town anymore. To those people, I say fuck you and stay out. Jerry Seinfeld wrote a really great article for the New Yorker this week talking about how the people that are leaving should stay out. And if they're leaving for the reason that there's no longer a servant class here to take care of them, or because they can't go get their chicken and waffles and their mimosas and leave a $2.50 tip anymore, good riddance to you. We don't want you here. You're not part of a New York that should exist, because there were people in this town that live here, and they live here because of the restaurants. They live here because they can go out and they can dine and they can live a high-style, lavish life. And now that lavish life of theirs has been impacted, they don't want to be in New York anymore. And I just find that so callous and so wrong. I think that is the wrong reason to live in a place. I live in New York because I like New York. I like it here. I like the people. I say this all the time. I love the buildings. I know that's the most cliche reason to love New York, but I fucking love knowing that there is a building right next to me. I know that I can look out and I will see something else. I won't look out and see a bunch of... And this is nothing against the misty hills and snow-covered treetops of my youth, but I don't need to look out and see that every day. And not that every day was snow-covered either, but it's beyond the point. I like being here. I like that there's life in the city. There was a really great comment from a cab driver who said that New York City, one of his favorite things is taking a person who just arrived in New York to live here from LaGuardia Airport and take them out the Queensboro Bridge. And that excitement that the passenger gets. They live for that. And that's what the cab drivers like. And I think that is so beautiful and wonderful, and the kind of people that we want to have in this city. So if you're part of the class that is moving out of your Soho 2-bedroom because, there's no party for me here anymore, get the fuck out. I don't want you in New York anymore. Because that is the reason that you are here. And if you're just here to live off people, then get out. It's not for you. Anyway, end of that rant. But back to the protests. So what makes these protests different, and what makes these protests different than what the RNC was last night, is that they still show genuine care for one another. You'll notice last night during the president's speech, if you want to call it that, hour-long, and again, we didn't watch it. We tuned in like twice to the president last night at the RNC.
I just wanted to hear if you could hear the...
We just wanted to hear if you could hear the protesters, yeah, because they had protesters out front the White House last night, or as close as they could get to the White House last night, to try to drown out the president. The journalists could hear it. We couldn't really hear it on the streams, but from all the reporting, it sounds like it was just a pretty ho-hum, pretty boring speech, just Trump off a teleprompter, which is exactly what his base doesn't want. So I don't know why they would have him do that, but they used the White House for it, and I don't think people are going to care about that either. But you'll notice at the RNC last night that everybody was sitting right on top of one another, not one mask. Continuing the theme of coronavirus is over. The RNC existed this week in this bubble world where the coronavirus was suddenly gone. They kept talking about coronavirus in the past tense.
For the most part, like it never happened.
For the most part,
it was like not even
like for the most part, like it had never happened. Like some kind of weird wind blew in and ruined the economy. Like some kind of weird gust came in and changed everything.
And people were severely overpraised for even acknowledging it. Like, Melania in her speech acknowledged, like, the families that had lost people. But still talking about it like it's in the past. But the press was like, oh, what a breath of fresh air. Melania Trump acknowledges the coronavirus. Like, that's the bar. That's the low bar.
And that shows the benefit of them having that low bar. Because we didn't really have a high bar for them anyway for the RNC this week. But they met the low bar of being... How do I put this? Because it was still bizarre. It still was an absolutely insane thing to watch. And another example of the hypocrisy of the right, they had Nicholas Sandman on. Enter Sandman.
I didn't realize that was his name.
Yeah, no.
I thought people were just calling him that.
No, that's his name. Why do you think they were just calling him Sandman?
What it was making, I don't know, maybe because he's boring, sleepy.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Okay, good logic. Okay. Anyway. So, they had him on to talk about how he had been canceled by the left. How he was just...
Can you remind us who that was?
Oh, thank you. So, Nicholas Sandman was the kid, I think he was 17 at the time. Yeah, I think he was probably 17 at the time. From Covington Catholic, that school in Kentucky that was at the pro-life march, or the March for Life, excuse me, in D.C., where the Native American man, the former World War II pilot, I believe, was playing a native drum song, and Nick Sandman went out with a bunch of his friends, and you can see on the video if you're in front of a computer right now or you have your phone out, look up Nicholas Sandman, and you'll see the video. It's him just standing in front of this Native American man who's playing his tribal drum song. And just smugly smiling at him in a MAGA hat. It's the most unlikable thing you'll see all day. Look it up. Go ahead. Pull it up. Pull it up for yourself. It's the most unlikable thing you'll see all day. And then if you watch the video, you'll see all of his friends mocking along with Nick Sandman, which kills Nick Sandman's defense of just trying to be there. He was just there. He wasn't doing anything nefarious. He was just standing there, just smiling. And that's just how he smiles. That was just him. But then you look and you see all of his friends bouncing around. He was talking about how he got canceled. And I struggle to think of anyone who has gotten canceled before who's allowed to speak at 8 p.m. on primetime television across every cable network in America. It's hard to find or think of like a canceled person who I've seen on CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, CNN, the Crooked Media Stream, and MSNBC, all in the same time. I can't think of one canceled person who's had that happen to them. And it speaks to their hypocrisy because it just shows that on the right and in conservative America, kids that look and act like Nick Sandman can get away with and do whatever they want because they are white kids. And let's just be plain about that. Or because they agree with it. Because they're white kids and because they agree with the Republican Party. Because they can be used as an example of cancel culture. There was just such a striking difference between the RNC and the DNC. Because despite what Mike Pence tried to say last week about how dark and how horrible the DNC was, the DNC at least left me with a feeling of hope. The DNC at least left me feeling better. I'll say nothing has scared me more this week than the RNC. Living this week with the RNC and having to... I'm honestly living in this kind of anxious state right now where I'm worried that the polling comes back after this week and Trump gets like a 4-point bump after Biden didn't really get a bump in the polls, and everybody talks about how Trump is now the hot candidate and the narrative switches, and then Trump runs away with this thing because the media won't cover it right and because there's something about the callous lies and the way the Republican Party tells them that for some reason Americans just don't say no to it a lot of the time. And I know that's changing. I know that the protests have shown us that is changing and all of that. But I don't know. Just weird to watch. And it's weird to watch. It was weird to watch the RNC have cop night in the shadow of the Jacob Blake shooting and the protests going on nationwide around it. It was just so weird to watch them, just not really acknowledge what's going on, and telling to see them not acknowledge what was going on. So I guess my message to anybody who's still thinking about voting with Republican parties in November is you are clearly outing yourself for who you are. If you vote Republican in November, if you align yourself with anti-Black Lives Matter, if you're going to get on Facebook and say things like, oh, well, they must have had a reason, there's nothing to think of you anymore than that you are just a racist person. And there's no way to get through to a racist person other than for that racist person to have to walk a mile or live a day in the shoes of the person that they hate. And that just has to happen based off karma and based off the universe, because we can't really, force people to live the life of a black person. There's one really great rallying cry that the WNBA had this weekend. I've heard it, and we've heard it before during the George Floyd protests, and that is that black doesn't come off. They don't go home and just get to take off their black skin. They don't get to go home and just, like it's a police uniform. They don't get to go home, take it off, throw it in the laundry, and put it on the next day. Like it's nothing. That's not part of their life. That's why Blue Lives and the Blue Lives Matter call doesn't matter, and it's fucking stupid, because there's no such thing as a blue life. There just isn't. You have chosen to be that. You have joined a police union to be that. You paid dues to the union to be a part of that. Every little bit of being a cop is an absolute choice. You can do anything. Anybody can become anything they want. And if you aspire to be part of a profession that we have seen hunt black people down for centuries, then I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. And I'm not going to do any headlines this week. I know we usually go through the headlines, but for one, I had a hard time finding just like the regular headlines on the Washington Post today, because usually I can go into the Washington Post and they have a nice little red box for me, and I just kind of tick through the latest and we make some quips and we have a good time. But I'm not going to do that today, because I figure that this was all way more important than that. And I know it's kind of a different topic, but I want to close off talking about what happened last night after the RNC, because I think it also speaks to, again, the callous turn myself into the victim nature of the Republican Party, and specifically Rand Paul. I figured it's a nice light way to close it. So last night, as we referenced already, there were protesters outside the president's speech at the RNC. There was, I don't know how many there were, but there was enough there that there was enough clattering and banging and chanting and sirens and stuff to at times be heard by the reporters at Trump's maskless RNC, which I guess we didn't get to finish talking about that. Last night at the fourth night of the RNC, where Trump accepted the nomination in a very ho-hum speech that basically was just a rehash of 2016 and aimed to only ignite his base and made no attempt to sway anybody else, just hoping that the worst nature of people will come forward when they vote in November. There was no testing for coronavirus. There was no temperature checks. Nobody had to get like a nasal swab, anything like that. They were allowed just to attend, unless, of course, they were going to be right around the president, in which case they did get the testing. Then you look to last night, and you look to the protests happening today in Washington. There's a march on Washington happening today. There was a story on, I believe, the Washington Post talking about how there was long lines to get into these, the Get Off Our Neck event, as it's being called in D.C. today. And the lines are because they're doing temperature checks before you can get in. They're saying that if your temperature is above 98 degrees, you're not getting into the protests. If you're not going to wear a mask, you're not going to protest. And I know that sounds like it should be a little thing, but one of the things that Trump and Republicans and conservatives like to say is, oh, well, if it's safe to protest, it must be safe for me to go out and do this. Oh, if it's safe for me to protest, I must be able to go get a filet mignon at Applebee's. And it's such a false equivalency because as we've seen at these protests, and specifically at protests today and last night, and even back during the George Floyd protests, people went out of their way to do what they could to social distance while also fighting a good fight against oppression in our shit society. And I hope you all tell your fathers to pay attention. I hope you'll all make sure that your parents and your family members are waking up to what's happening around them, because that is the group that we struggle most with. Not to say that everybody in your family or anybody or everybody over the age of 50 is a devout, terrible, racist, or anti-Semite or anything like that. But there are issues that they didn't have to learn about, didn't have to understand growing up, and now they're forced to understand it, and it's jarring and it's shocking. And of course, there's going to be a lot of resistance to having to learn something new when you're 65 or however old. But the effort needs to be made. But back to the protest last night, too. So not only are they taking precautions that the RNC hasn't taken, but they're also, the media and the Republican Party can find a way to make anything seem nefarious from the wrong side. So last night, again, full well knowing, because you couldn't not hear that if the reporters could hear the clamoring of protesters outside, I'm sure the people in the audience inside last night on the south lawn of the White House listening to the president make his acceptance speech for a political campaign, again using our taxpayer grounds and our taxpayer funding to do it, which is illegal and a violation. And I don't understand the Hatch Act fully, but I understand that there was a lot of Hatch Act violations last night and over the course of the RNC. But all these people in attendance knew full well last night that there was protests happening out front of the White House. So why on earth did these people, knowing full well that they were the ones being protested, essentially, or no, because they're not the ones being protested. The things they're doing are being protested, and in some cases, I mean, if you're Trump and Rudy Giuliani and part of the absolutely fucked ecosystem that is our government right now, yes, they were being protested. So, to see Senator Rand Paul knowingly and purposely walk out through a swarm of protesters, and then to act all surprised that he was heckled at, booed, pushed, and shoved on his way through the crowd, is the most transparent form of turn me into the victim, look what they're doing to me kind of stuff that the Republican Party and the GOP are hoping that people will latch on to around these protests. They don't want the message to be received. They want it to be an opportunity to villainize people standing up for their rights to exist in the society, because as long as they do that, they can continue to oppress them. If they can continue to show that, oh, well, look what they did, they can continue to oppress them. Well, I thought that would be later, but it wasn't. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in to Oh and Another Thing. We'll be back next Friday. I'm sure things won't be any better, but we'll come back and we'll talk about them then. Again, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Have a good weekend. Enjoy your week. We'll see you Friday.